Tank is one of the most important classes in dungeons, because it soaks up everyone's damage. Because of this, Tank is also quite a popular class because every party needs one, and it's also one of the cheapest classes in dungeons. So, in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the best armor, pets, and weapons that you need, and also how you should be playing each boss fight. Because Tank is so important in the dungeons team, I'm also going to be raising the recommended catacombs level by a bit as well. So, for entrance in floor 1, as always, it's just going to be 0 as soon as you can get in. For floor 2, I recommend Catacomb 6, floor 3, 10, floor 4, Catacombs 15, floor 5, Catacombs 20, floor 6, 25, and for floor 7, I will recommend 28 to 29. Starting off with floor 1, Tank in floor 1 is very simple because the mobs don't do a lot of damage and the boss fight is relatively straightforward as well. For the armor, I would recommend a full set of Protected Dragon Armor or a full set of Old Dragon Armor, whichever you have. However, I would actually recommend the Protected Dragon Armor because the ability, the full set bonus, actually provides quite a lot of defense when you have a lot of missing HP, and this really helps add some bulk. For the sword, I would just recommend any mid-game weapon that you have lying around, like the Aspect of the Dragons for instance. Just something that deals decent damage, but also something that might provide a lot of crit chance, because when you enter your tank, you lose a lot of crit chance. And finally, for the pet, I recommend the Blue Whale, because it gives a good amount of bulk, and I just think a rare Blue Whale is enough. It just gives a decent amount of bulk and good base HP. In the boss fight, floor 1 is very simple. All you need to do is just follow Bonzo around, and then whenever Bonzo attacks one of your teammates, you'll just soak up the damage for them, leaving them to just deal DPS to Bonzo. However, if you're running low, then just use your Cast of Stone ability, which negates loads of damage, and you should be fine. Floor 2 boss fight is actually quite a lot harder than the floor 1, because the mobs and Scarf just deal a lot more damage. Anyway, for the armor, you can still use your Protected Dragon Armor, because it's actually pretty good. However, there is another set I would recommend. You can also start using 3/4 Heavy Armor with a Crystallized Heart. The reason I recommend this is because Heavy Armor provides a decent amount of EHP and defense, and the Crystallized Heart especially doubles your healing, which is very useful for keeping you alive when paired with things like the Wand of Mending and Zombie Swords. For the weapon, I would recommend an Aspect of the Dragons, or just any mid-game sword like you had in floor 1, but also, it can also be worth using the Zombie Soldier Cutlass, because it heals you for 10 health, and it also gives you 100 attack speed, which is quite good. And as for the pet, as I said with the last floor, I still recommend the Rare Blue Whale, because it just gives a lot of base HP, and also the defense per max health is also quite useful as well. For the boss fight, the Scuff boss fight is a little bit more complex than the floor 1, because there's a couple of orders which you have to kill the things in. In the first phase, you should aim to kill the priest first, and then the warrior, and then the other undeads, but they don't really do much, so it's not too bad. However, in the second phase, after you kill the priest, the warrior can actually do quite a lot of damage to you and your team. And also, Scarf especially has an ability where he spews out loads of soul sand, and early game Catacomb players, this does a lot of damage, so you might need to prepare to tank that as well. For floor 3, the gear is very similar to floor 2, because in my opinion, floor 3 really isn't that much of a difficulty step up from floor 2. For the armor, it stays exactly the same, although I think that the heavy armor, because you have a high catacombs level, is maybe slightly better than the Protected Dragon Armor at this point. And the Crystallized Heart provides double healing, and at this point it might be worth getting a Power Orb, the Ornate or Florid Zombie Sword, and maybe also a Wand of Restoration. At this point, you should put Reinforced on your armor. For the weapon, this doesn't really matter too much because as a tank, your primary objective is not to deal damage. But I still say that the Zombie Sword Cutlass, or the Aspect of the Dragons, whatever you have, it all works fine, it's not terrible. And for the pet, I still recommend the Rare Blue Whale, although you can actually use a turtle as well, although I don't have it at the moment, but I think the turtle is also known to be quite a decent pet as well. For the floor 3 boss fight, each member of the team will have to solo a Guardian. Your job here is to go and help the person killing the Reinforced Guardian, because this has the most defense, and it's the hardest Guardian to kill. Once your team has soloed all the Guardians, it moves on to the next phase. All you have to do here is just stand near the Professor and let your team do the DPS needed to kill it. Same with the third phase, you just stand near the professor and hit it a couple of times to gain back some HP, but apart from that, you really should be fine. Floor 4 is actually quite a difficult floor to do, because there's quite a lot of things that can burst you down very quickly, like spirit chickens which deal true damage. For the armor, I would recommend 3/4 super heavy armor. This is because super heavy armor has a catacombs requirement of 15, and 15 is probably a good level which you should start doing floor 4, and super heavy armor in general gives a lot of defense and in general just gives a lot of EHP. You should aim to get a crystallized heart. The crystallized heart doubles healing, and this means that all of your healing items like the Wand of Mending and the Ornate Zombie Sword will be very effective in dungeons. Also, it's worth upgrading your crystallized heart to the revived heart. For the weapon, I recommend the Hypercleaver. The Hypercleaver has the ability Cleave, where it has a 4-block radius, and this means that it hits loads of mobs at the same time. But you might think that why is that useful for tank, because tank doesn't do much damage anyway. But the thing is that you get so much lifesteal from this, and the lifesteal or siphon that you get really contributes to keeping you alive. For the pet, I recommend the Blue Whale. Although you technically could go with rare, I think that the epic is better, because it just gives a lot more EHP, and the bulk ability actually improves when you upgrade it to the epic. In the floor 4 boss fight, your teammates will let you know where they want you to stand. This will usually be in the center of the boss room, so then your teammates can go and clear the mobs, and they can also focus on the Spirit Bear. Once they kill the Spirit Bear, your job as a tank is just to sit down and tank all the damage that your teammates make, and you basically just allow your teammates to just freely damage the Spirit Bear and clear all the mobs around it. Once your teammates have killed the Spirit Bear, then they will just shoot the Spirit Bear at Fawn, and all they need to do is just do this 4 times and you'll beat the floor. Moving on to floor 5. Floor 5 is probably the first floor where tank is really useful, because the livers actually do quite a lot of damage to you and your teammates. For the weapon, I recommend the Liver Dagger. This is because the Liver Dagger provides good base stats and is also relatively cheap at around 7 million coins. However, the really good thing about it is that it gives a 100% crit chance, and this is really useful for tanks, because often tanks don't have a reforge which gives crit chance. They'll probably have something like Giant or Perfect. Additionally, this also gives 100% attack speed, and often, as a tank, you often don't optimize your talismans for attack speed, instead for things like health and defense. For the armor, I would recommend a revived heart. The crystallized heart is not really that great, but you may be able to get away with it. But really, you should be getting the revived heart. And for the rest of the pieces, I recommend the perfect chestplate and 2/4 Necromancer Lord armor, although you will need to get a floor 6 carry completion. And if you want to get a floor 6 carry completion, then you can always tune into my streams, because I often do floor 6 carries, and this is usually on a Saturday. If you want to come, then hope to see you there. For the pet, I recommend the Blue Whale. This should really be epic or legendary. I still think rare is just not really good enough, but the epic provides enough defense, and also the legendary is very good because it gives a plus 20% max HP. In the actual boss fight, the livid boss fight is very simple. All you have to do is just tank for the livids. The only slight complication is where you stand. If you have a lot of mages, then you should probably go stand near the portal, because mages are very good at just dealing lots of damage to lots of mobs. However, if your team mainly specializes in single hit damage, like a berserker or archer, then I'd recommend standing in the middle, so then they can focus on the correct livid. Floor 6 is another floor where a tank is really necessary, because the terracottas do tons of damage, and it's very important that you have a tank to take all of the damage. For the armor, I would recommend the 2/4 Necromancer Lord and the perfect chestplate, like in the floor below. However, if you do have the money, then the upgrade to the Necromancer Lord chestplate is definitely worth it. Although a high tier perfect chestplate is also very good and is quite comparable to the Necromancer Lord chestplate. Additionally, you should really get a Reaper mask. Although it does require Zombie Slayer 7 and it is quite expensive, I'd say it is absolutely worth the investment because it's very good and you need to get it for the rest of your dungeons anyway, so you may as well get it sooner than later. For the weapon, I still really like the Livid Dagger because of the 100 attack speed and the 100 crit chance, and in general, it's just got pretty good base stats and it's also pretty cheap as well. There are also a few miscellaneous items I want to mention. Firstly, the Florid Zombie Sword, which is very good for instant healing, although it only has 5 charges. Second, the Wand of Atonement. This is really good. because it actually heals you over 7 seconds. And finally, some kind of power orb. You don't need to have an overflux, but I would still try to have a mana flux. For the pet, I do recommend that you get a blue whale, although this really should be legendary. If you don't want to get a blue whale, the legendary turtle is also definitely an option, but just make sure that you don't put a dwarf turtle shell on it, because there's no point because you already get knockback resistance. In the boss fight, you and your team should communicate where they want you to stand in the terracottas phase. This will either be in the middle of the boss room, or it will probably be in one of the portals. Overall, it doesn't really matter, and you should just let your team decide. Another thing I should mention is that whether you want to kill the golems before the run or during the run. If you're a higher catacombs party, then you should kill them during the run, because as a tank, you can probably afford to tank them. However, if you're a little bit more inexperienced and you're afraid of dying, then you should probably kill it before, because this removes the risk of the golems, and the golems actually do a lot of damage. Additionally, make sure to pop your ultimate to cast a stone, because this really helps with the terracottas, and basically makes you negate all damage. Once you're done with the terracottas, the boss fight becomes very easy. You just kill the giants, and then once you kill Satan, the run is over, and yeah, you finished it. And now we get to the big floor 7. Floor 7 is really important as a tank, and you need to make sure that you can do floor 7 and you know what you're doing. Because trust me, you will get called an idiot and a monkey by so many people in Party Finder. For the armor, it's pretty simple. You get 3 False Golder and the Reaper Mask. The Reaper Mask, as before, gives you double healing and is just extremely good. And the Goldor provides very good EHP and also takes 10% damage reduction from withers for each piece, which results in 30% damage reduction, which is actually really significant if you think about it. For the weapon, the Livid Dagger is also a very good option, although some more utility items which are going to come in very useful. The Last Breath is extremely useful because if you shoot it 5 times, you essentially halve the defense of Necron, and you should do this whenever you have the opportunity because it really helps out your team. Additionally, a Soul Warp is incredibly useful because it's one of the only weapons that can consistently keep aggro of Necron. For the pet, I really just think a legendary blue whale or a legendary turtle is the way. It should be quite high level, 90 plus, but you should really survive in this. Additionally, you can also experiment with the Wither Skeleton because you take a lot less damage than Wither Skeletons, 30% in fact. I know that in the previous guides, I always said that floor 7 was all about communication. And whilst that is true, you do also really need to just know your role as a tank. A couple of things which will come in useful. Firstly, the Jingle Bells and the Soul Whip. These are both items used to keep the aggro of Necron, and these are especially useful in phases 1 and 2. The Rabbit Hat and the Jerry Machine Gun are also very useful when trying to upcrush Necron. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, the Last Breath is really useful because as a tank, you need to support your teammates, so it's just a great way of halving the defense of Necron. And with the end of floor 7, this tank guide also comes to an end. If you found this guide somewhat useful or helped you in any way, then please consider subscribing because it really helps out the channel. And with that, thank you for watching and hope you have a good rest of your day.